What's going on, guys? It's Cooper Codes. In this video, we're going to be creating this notifications component, which allows the user to enable notifications for your application. If they're to say yes right here, it's then going to ask your browser if you want to allow this site to show notifications, which will say allow to. That itself is going to send a little thank you for enabling notifications as a web notification here. And then we can even add extra functionality on top, such as clicking this button to notify the user. And so that'll show a notification for a certain user's action. This is really powerful stuff and allows you to add some extra functionality to your React applications. So let's get into it. In this video, we're going to be using Chakra UI just to create some easy to use components for our alert. So I'm going to create a React app with the Chakra template. It's going to be this command here. And so let's hop over to an empty folder. Once you're in your empty folder, you can say npx create React app, my-app, whatever you want it to be named, and then the Chakra UI template like this. All right, so once that's done, we can cd into my-app. You guys are going to see, because this is a Chakra UI created app, it's going to look a little bit different than your regular create React app. The main important part here is we are going to be doing the majority of the coding in the app.js right here. We can see what it currently looks like by saying npm start. So this is what the app currently looks like. We can go into the app.js and get rid of a lot of their boilerplate here. I'm going to remove everything except the Chakra provider just to start. And so we can get rid of all these other imports from Chakra UI React that we're not going to be using. Then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to import everything that this video is going to require. For example, the main components are going to be around alert. So I'm going to say alert, alert icon, alert title. And these are all just components created by Chakra UI for us to use in React. And there's also alert description, and there's button, container, and box. As we use these components, I'll explain what they're doing for the front end. We can get rid of the logo and the color mode switcher here. We don't really need those. And alongside React, we can also import other things that we're going to need, such as useState. Before we get into coding what the front end is going to look like, I'm actually going to do the notification logic for the user first. And so we are going to put this into a single function, where this function is going to check if notifications exist for a user's browser, and then try and send them a notification as well. So we can start by just saying function, notify user, and I'm going to do something called a default value for a parameter. So I want some notification text that we can pass in to this notify user. If we don't pass in anything to the user, I'm just going to assume that we're enabling notifications. So it's going to say thank you for enabling notifications. But if we do pass in something for this first parameter, it's going to overwrite whatever this value is. We can start the logic of this function by checking if notifications even exist. So we can say if not notification in the window object that we have access to through React, which is kind of like the browser object. It has all the different browser related APIs in there, including notifications. So we can see if notification exists in that window object. And so if it doesn't, for example, with this not here, we can alert to the user that the current window doesn't support notifications. So we can say browser does not support notifications. Then we can do some else if logic here, and we can say, okay, we can get access to the notification interface, which allows us to use the notification web API. One value that we can read from notifications is the permissions, if the user has granted or denied permissions. So if this current permission for the current browser is equal to granted, then we can send a notification to the user. We can also save the notification like this if we want, but I'm just going to say const notification equal to new notification like this. And by default, creating this new notification is going to notify the user on our front end. And so this line of code right here is exactly how we actually notify the user. But it's important to realize we can only notify the user if the permissions have been granted. And so I'm just going to pass in the notification text here. This is the text that our user is going to see alongside the notification. Then we can also do another else if here saying that if the notification permission hasn't been denied yet, so the user hasn't said no yet, we want to then ask if the user wants to enable notifications. The notification API itself makes this very easy for us by providing us with a function called notification.requestPermission. If you've ever seen that little bell icon show up on Chrome or anything like that, where it says, would you like to enable notifications for this site? That is what .requestPermission does. And it's going to return a promise. An easy way to think about promises for this situation is that we can create logic for when this request permission is done. So we can say when the user has either denied or, accepted notifications, we can then take this permission from that denial or acceptance, if that makes sense, and show it here. This permission here is passed to us by the callback function of request permission here. And so it's actually a text object where we can say if the permission that the user said is now granted, now we can pass in a notification, and we can even use the same line of code at line 18. To think about it like this, the two ways that our user can get a notification is either by already having the granted notifications, or by our website requesting permission, and then they give permission, which is going to allow us to show notifications. You don't have to show a user a notification right away, but before you notify a user, you do have to check if it's been granted or denied. You're only able to send notifications once the permission has been granted by the user. And so although it might seem simple, or maybe not so simple with this .then statement here, this is the entire logic we need to even notify a user. So now we can think about the logic for what we want to show to our user. For this application, you can think about there being 3 different states. The first state is we show the would you like to enable notifs. So we either show that, or we show notification related functionality. For example, the button I pressed in the very beginning where you could press on it and it would show you a notification, or show nothing because the user has disabled notifications. These are the 3 states that our application is going to show. So something I'm going to do for this video is I'm going to save if the user has responded to this question or not in a state. So I'm going to say const user responded, and then also set user responded. And it's going to be initially be set to false. The user cannot respond instantly, so when our application gets started up, it's going to be false initially. Let's go into our return statement and kind of code out the logic behind these 3 states before we even make any buttons. For the first one, we want to think of it like this. We only want to show this component if the user hasn't responded. So this is going to be initially false. And so if the user hasn't responded and the user currently does not have the permission set equal to granted for their notifications, then we want to render the would you like to enable notifs. And so just to explain that again, this part's saying that the user has not responded, so we want to show this component. And also the user has not granted permissions. Oh, and this granted should be a string, by the way. My bad. And so we can do a question mark to kind of chain ternary statements. So chain kind of logic statements. This can be our first piece of logic, is if this logic becomes true, render this part. We can also do a colon and add another piece of logic to show something else. If the user does have notifications that are granted, so we can even copy this here, then we can show the button that allows the user to send themselves notifications. And so we can do the same thing, question mark, and then the code's going to be in here, which I'm just going to have the Chakra provider for. Then at the very end, we're going to have a colon for the default base case. This isn't a perfect code example, but I'm just going to make a empty React fragment here. So I'm just saying I don't want to show any code if it's in either of these. And we could even do something like this. H1, you have disabled notifications. Something simple like that. So let's get started on making that would you like to enable notifications screen. We can start by creating a container for everything to live in. This is just so everything is centered by default, which is kind of nice. We can then work on creating an alert. So alerts in Chakra have a bunch of different statuses such as success. And Chakra makes it easy for you to work with alerts. If I want to show like a check mark on the status success, I can do alert icon. And I didn't even have to describe what the icon is because Chakra already knows this is a success component. So there's a default icon associated with that. We can then make a little box to hold our alert title, which is just going to be notifications. Then the alert description. This is going to show the user what are we asking for. And so I'm going to say, would you like to enable notifications? And since we want everything to be contained within this alert, that green box you guys saw initially is an easy way to think about it. We're then going to have our 2 buttons at the bottom here within the alert. The first one's going to be a button with a color scheme that is going to be teal. There's a color I like from Chakra. The size of the button is going to be SM. And when we click this button, we want to run a function that we're going to create. I'm going to call this function enable notifs and close. And I'm going to just have that say, I believe I said sure, something along those lines, just to make it like nice and fun. So it's not just like yes or no. Then we can copy over this full button component and make another one. I'm then going to make it gray. And I'm just going to say, no thanks. And this is going to be disable notifs and close. 2 different on-click functions here. And so you'll see these are not defined. So we can go and just define these functions really quick. So we can go to the top here and say function enable notifs and close, and then function disable notifs and close. So we can go to our localhost and see what this looks like so far. All right, amazing. We have the component created. It has a little icon, it has the title and the description, also has the 2 buttons. So right now, if we click a button, we want to try to notify the user with that function we created earlier, and we also want to hide this notifications box as well. So now we can go and create the actual logic behind the clicking the sure button and behind clicking the no thanks button. So let's go and do that. So if we click the enable notifs and close, what we want to do is we want to try to notify the user. And then we also want to set that the user responded to true. If we disable notifications, all we have to do is set that the user responded to true as well. The reason why all we do in disable here is because as soon as the user's responded, what's going to happen is user responded is going to become true. The opposite of true is false. And so this entire statement here is going to become false. If they disable the notifications, it's not going to be permission granted. The only other avenue the code has to go is this code right here where it says you have disabled notifications. If the user has responded again, but let's say they enabled notifications, what's going to happen is this thing, same thing, this full statement is going to become false because the user responded, but the permissions are going to be granted from the user, which is going to allow them to be able to go to the Chakra provider that we created here, which is going to allow them to go to the component that we're going to create here. So I'm actually showing you guys something for the sake of learning. An issue is if we wanted to press sure right now, look at what happens. Our website isn't giving the user enough time to actually press allow or block for the notifications. So whatever we do from here, it's still going to say you've disabled because our React is rendering too fast. This is a perfect kind of beginner's example for using async and await. We can turn this enable notifications into an asynchronous function. Asynchronous functions allow us to wait on user input and just make JavaScript code wait in general. We can then make this notify user code at line 37. Go up here. We can also make this an asynchronous function, which means we can use the await keyword with it. Think of it like this. We want to wait for the notify user to fully go through. And it's not as simple as that. If we were to run the code right now, it actually wouldn't wait for the notify user 100%. We have to go into the notify user code and say, what line do we need to wait for? Well, we need to wait for this request permission promise to be fulfilled. So we can make an await statement right here. This means that this notify user code is now asynchronous, and it's going to fully wait for this request permission to enter the then statement here. Then it's going to process this logic in the then statement, and we are then going to kind of jump out over at line 37 here. And because notify user is now a promise, we are then going to use the .then. This allows us to create a callback function to execute code after this is done. And so after this is done, we want to move in all the other logic here. So for example, the set user responded to be true. This is a kind of beginner's example of using async and await, but the simple way to think about it is notify user was running too fast because it wasn't waiting for request permission. We can add asynchronous functions here to enable the functionality of waiting for the request permission to be fulfilled. So if we go back to our application, and remember guys, while you're doing this whole thing, you're going to constantly want to go into your little, I would recommend using Chrome for this video, first of all. We want to go in here and press reset permission. This means that the website can ask to send notifications again, and then reload. Then you're going to be able to continue doing your testing. So you're going to do that a bunch if you're working with notifications, especially setting them up. So I can press sure here, and you guys will see it's being way different. It's not running my code right away. It's instead waiting for that user input. So when I press allow, what actually is happening is it's showing nothing because right now it's going into the code at line 67 and 69 here. Before it was hitting line 72, but now it's saying that the notification permissions have been granted. So we can now make a button at line 68 so we give the user something to work with. I'm just going to make this an incredibly simple little button. And when we click this button, what we want to do is we want to call the notify user code. But this time we can pass in a unique notification text. For example, thanks for watching this video, because we're kind of nearing the end of this. And I'm just going to say, click to show a thank you. Amazing. My bad. This syntax should instead be like this, where you use an arrow first. This is going to prevent our localhost from actually calling it over and over again. So now we should be able to go to the front end and test everything out. And so like I said before, guys, right now it's acknowledging that previously we enabled notifications. So we can click this and it is going to say thanks for watching this video, which is pretty cool. But we can always clear our notifications by pressing reset permission here, refreshing the page. Now we can say sure, allow, and then it's going to say click to show a thank you. So I can click this here. Boom, it's going to say thanks for watching this video. If you guys are interested in videos regarding push notifications, such as a server telling us something and then we do notifications, you'd be surprised. This video is still incredibly valuable for that. Right now, when the user has granted permissions for notifications, we can notify whenever we want. We don't even need a direct user input currently to send a notification. But if we want to get a live data stream from a server, for example, like let's say like a baseball game starts and you want a notification to send to your user in your ESPN or something, right? Then that's going to be a little bit more complicated because you're going to get that live data stream from the server. The notifications part is kind of just the more simple tool. If you wanted a live data stream that is getting data, and then when data gets sent through, it shows a notification, that's a completely different system. But I can definitely do videos about that if you guys are interested. So I'm going to end this video in the most corny way possible by clicking a thanks for watching this video notification. But seriously, guys, thanks for watching the video. Hopefully this was helpful in understanding React. And also a cool example of asynchronous functions is kind of unintentional in this video, but it's a great example of how async and await can help us solve some problems. So hopefully you guys learned a bunch, and thanks so much for watching.